Hello there, Duke friends, and welcome to your latest compliance training. This is your caring counselor, Miss Bryant, and I'm going to be hosting your training today. We'll probably have to do this in a couple of parts, but my other hope is that it won't be too painful and it'll give you some good information about how to handle situations, and just always know that I'm here to support you. So without further ado, we're going to begin talking about coping with challenges and supporting the whole student. Some of this information will probably sound very familiar to some of you. Some of this information I am required to present every year in some form or fashion. And so sit tight and here we go. All right, so today we're going to talk a little bit about that buzzword right there, trauma-informed, what that means to be trauma-informed. We're going to talk about mental health awareness, suicide prevention, reporting suspected abuse or neglect, and what your requirements are for that. And then also we'll talk a little bit about self-care and coping with COVID-19. All right, so let's look at trauma-informed. This is, like I said, it's kind of a buzzword that you need to get used to hearing. Some of you may have taken some trainings this summer on being trauma-informed. That's something that you're going to see more trainings come out dealing with. That's a really important topic right now. And I think it just kind of comes along with, education is changing and our kids are changing and the family dynamics are changing. And also when we know better, we do better. And so we are going to talk about this. So before we can, let's go ahead and define trauma. And that's going to be any experience that leaves a person feeling hopeless, helpless, fearing for their life, or survival, and or their safety. This experience can be real or perceived. So this isn't just when we're talking about our young kids who may have experienced abuse or neglect in a bad home situation, but this is kids who've experienced, hurricanes, like tremendous flooding events like Hurricane Harvey. These are kids who could have been in a car wreck or seen a car wreck. Kids who have lost someone. You really have to open up your scope of thinking when you're talking about trauma. And this is a statistic that we really can't argue, the impact of on our students. More than 5 million students are currently enrolled in Texas schools, and 100% of those students have been affected by COVID-19. So what does it mean to be trauma-informed? If you're walking around and saying, I am a trauma-informed educator, that means that we are shifting from asking the question, what is wrong with you, which we all tend to think that in our heads, and that's okay, but shifting that questioning to what has happened to you instead, or what is the function of this behavior, what is driving this behavior. It means that we understand the impact that trauma can have on the way students view themselves and the world. And it means that we understand the impact trauma has on students' emotions, behaviors, learning, and their ability to interact with others. It means that we are able to step back and ask what experiences are driving the way that a student thinks about themselves and others, and also asking how does it impact the way they behave and learn. So just kind of for your information, here are some of the themes of trauma. You have terror, powerlessness. I think that is a big one that we deal with some of our kiddos. Being unable to say or do anything. That's why sometimes choice is so important. Hurt, fear, anger, revenge, and victim thinking. So these are just some of those, like I said, kind of your FYI. We're not going to spend a lot of time on that. All right. everyone reacts differently to stressful situations. So sometimes we may fear and worry about our own health and the health of our loved ones. You may see changes in eating or sleeping patterns, difficulty concentrating, worsening of health problems, or those development of somatic symptoms like tummy aches, worsening of already present mental health conditions, and increased use of alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs. Now, that being said, hopefully we don't see a lot of that in our little kids, but these are things that are pretty uniform across all ages, and these are things that you can be watching out for yourself as well. All right, so we have all kinds of personal stressors, and if you want to think about our kids and think about when they went home for spring break last year, they didn't know that they would not be coming back to school and seeing their friends again. And life as we all know it is differently. We're staying home. Some of us didn't go on vacations. Some of us aren't going. All of a sudden, karate classes and gymnastics and all of these other extracurriculars were canceled. We can't even go to church. These are things that are completely different and sudden. Quarantine is, a real stressor for some people. The social distancing aspect, I think that as people, we are we have a need to be connected, and that's very difficult for people. It's also difficult to see people wearing masks and not being able to read their faces. And we also have all of this information going around about, keeping germs away and washing our hands, and the news that's out, and all of these. When we do go places, there are different rules than there were before, and that can be very scary for a kid, to be thinking that everything is fine, and then all of a sudden they are seeing a lot of negative information, and a lot of information that leads them to believe that they could be very sick and that people are dying, and that can be very scary for a kid. And so I think these are things that we have to keep in mind as our kids are coming back to campus, or as we are interacting with them in our virtual settings, things that could be going on. And not only that, they may have parents who are working in, those healthcare fields and different things, and they may be seeing and hearing different things than we are. All right, moving on to mental health awareness. So with our kids, why do we intervene? Why does it matter? And so some of these statistics I've gone through and updated from past presentations, but this one at the top is pretty interesting. Half of all mental health conditions begin by the age of 14, and 75% of mental health conditions develop by the age of 24. The normal personality and behavior changes of adolescence may mimic or mask symptoms of a mental health condition. I know that's especially true of people who have ever had or worked with teenagers. But early engagement and support are crucial to improving outcomes. We really have to intervene with these kids early and often, so that we can try to keep them from becoming chronic or having more severe mental health issues by the time that they're young adults. Mental health conditions can also begin to develop in young children because they're still learning how to identify and talk about thoughts and emotion. Their most obvious symptoms are behavioral. Symptoms in children may include changes in school performance, excessive worry or anxiety. For instance, fighting to avoid bed or to avoid bedtime or going to school. Hyperactive behavior, frequent nightmares, frequent disobedience or aggression. That is something that a lot of people see as just being obstinate, but sometimes it can be rooted in anxiety or trauma, and frequent temper tantrums. Half of all chronic mental illness begins by age 14, 3/4 by age 24. Despite effective treatment, there are long delays, sometimes decades, between the first appearance of symptoms and when people get help. And for a long time, there's been a stigma about mental health, and we just say, oh, that kid is being a brat, or that kid is, terrible. But we really need to start looking at what some of those underlying conditions could be, and could there be something that we could be doing for them? All right, here are just some different statistics here. I won't spend too much time on those. 70% of youth in the juvenile justice systems have at least one mental health condition. That's pretty big, considering that it's significant if you're a juvenile in the justice system. Let's see. There was one statistic I was looking for. So on the bottom left, the prevalence of children ever diagnosed with ADHD increased by 42% between 2003 and 2011. So that's pretty significant, and we all have ideas about why that is. And possibly it's just us being more informed about what that looks like. And let me see if there's anything else that we wanted to do. I like to always point out this one. The juvenile and criminal justice involvement, 65% of girls and 75% of boys have at least one diagnosed mental illness. Now, I don't know what the disparity between that means. I think that we can all speculate. But in general, females tend to be diagnosed or underdiagnosed for things because they don't always show or present typical symptoms. And this one down here at the bottom, this is big, and this is something that we all know that we are seeing and hearing more of. Suicide is the second leading cause of death for people aged 10 to 34. My kiddo just turned 10. That just devastates me that we have children that are that young who are completing suicide. So that is why we intervene. And here's just kind of a chart and what we talked about. Here's suicide numbers. It really jumps big in these later adolescent years, and then here into the college and or early adulthood. So suicide and depression is very real, and it's something that I think not only as educators, but as a society, we have to start looking at that, and especially during times when we can't be connected to people as we normally are. I think that that's something we have to be very diligent about. All right, possible emotional difficulties. Again, ongoing difficulties with concentration, moodiness, withdrawal. That's a big one. If you see them withdrawing from their friends for long periods of time, for a long period of time, a change in energy and activity levels, difficulties with coping with typical problems or stressors. These are kids that, might throw a tantrum because you didn't pick them, you didn't call on them first, or they are serving the wrong thing at lunch, just things that typical kids should be able to handle. And ongoing difficulties relating to daily situations and peers. All right, these are things requiring immediate attention. I just kind of want to draw your attention to, obviously, if they report drug or alcohol use, and also if they're reporting suicidal ideation, that is like a big 911. Please let somebody know. All right, here are some of the warning signs of suicide, and I'll send this presentation to you guys later. But if you see them talking or writing, that's a big one for you writing teachers. If they're feeling, read those notebooks, because sometimes there's a wealth of information in there. But if you hear them, kind of not only withdrawing, but, talking about like giving stuff away, or, saying that the things are unbearable, or any of those things. These are things that you should watch out for, should look out for. All right. So these are some of the things that you can do: listen, read, assure, and seek. Like I said, I will send this to you. I'm going to cut this off right here.